Welcome to another edition of DT Live. This will be taking into account episode 48. We're doing it live this week, just to save a little bit of time. So, been having to work a few extra hours this week, so I've been needing to get a taking into account episode out of the way and try to do them on Thursday. Thursdays have been kind of a struggle here lately trying to do this. By the way, those of you that are in the YouTube chat already, quite a few of you were here early. How is the audio? Let's see. Yeah, we got Felipe already in the chat. How you doing, Felipe? I read DT in 2D and I was like, WTF. No, we're in 3D today, so no need to WTF. Christian was also in the chat. How you doing, Christian? STS Tech, how you doing, Mark? Mr. Steve Gunnick, he says, sup, dudettes. Chuck is also with us. Gibran, how you doing? Long time no see. Yeah. Ben Fitzpatrick, hey Derek, I like your beard. All right, appreciate that, Ben. Matt, sounds good. Gibran, sounds good. Audio's fine. Good audio. Audio's good. Thank you. All right, so I want to get that out of the way before we get too far into things. By the way, I'll also keep up with some of the IRC chat. Those of you hanging out in the DistroTube IRC chat channel over on the freenode network. All right, so we'll give everybody a little bit of a few minutes to get here. This was a very impromptu stream. I appreciate the super chat there, Analog. Thank you, buddy. He says a big hello. All right, thanks, Analog. Much appreciated. Yeah, so I didn't do a taking into account episode last week, and I thought about not doing one this week. Last week I didn't do one because many of the stories I had planned to cover last week, I had a guest appearance on Destination Linux Sunday this past week. We recorded Destination Linux Sunday, and then they released it a couple of days earlier, or later after they went ahead and edited the video and the audio and everything. So many of the stories that we covered on that would have been stories I would have covered on taking into account. I didn't want to record taking into account, cover those stories, and then do it all over again on Sunday with those guys. So I took the week off from doing the taking into account series last week. So I really wanted to get this in this week. Doing it live was the best time. I've been working all day, just got home. So, and somebody in the chat was mentioning this is a good time for Europe. I don't think so. Is this really a good time for Europe, or are you being sarcastic there? It's a good time for Europe. It's probably not a great time for our friends in Asia and Australia, though. So, this is typically the time I do these things, though. Typically, if I do a live stream, it's usually about this time of night for me. Now, getting back to the chat here. Yeah, I dozed off, and DT's voice startled me. All right. I was about to go to sleep, but sleep is overrated. That's true. You don't need as much sleep as you think. Although I recently read an article, a medical article, that states that actually you probably need more sleep than what people have been recommending. Like, there's a lot of studies that have been done saying you can get by on 5-6 hours of sleep a night. Now doctors are starting to go the other way, saying, no, you really need 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep. So I don't know. I don't know what's healthy for you or what's not. I would probably just let your body decide, though, instead of, worrying about alarm clocks or whatever. Just go to bed, and when it's time to get up, get up. Yeah, you stream when I'm really tired and trying to go to sleep. Yeah, so apparently this is not a great time for some people. Hello, DT. Do you think Arch is better than Void? If so, why? I don't know. I haven't lived in Void. I've tried Void on some test machines. I've tried Void in some VMs. Void looks like a really good distro, but having not lived in it, I can't answer that question. I would like to hop to Void on my main production machine at some point, though, and give it a try. I got a nice cup of coffee to follow along. Hey, great. So I missed some of the chat here. Hey, DT, I'm just packaging a piece of open source software called DupliSeq. Very cool. It's a great time for Europe, guys. It's basically in the middle of the night. Okay. Yeah, you need 9 hours. Any deviation is bad for health. That's what the article I read suggested. Yeah, 9 hours is a good amount of sleep. It's been a long time since I was able to get 9 hours. So. Been several days, actually, this week. 5 to 6 hours is what I've been on the last 3 or 4 days. So I'm had a long week. I actually have a day off tomorrow. I'm going to sleep tomorrow. So, all right, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and get set up here, and we will go ahead and get some things going. So this week, of course, has been an interesting week as far as, well, actually the last week and a half or so has been interesting for me because of some big changes as far as software and hardware. I hopped to BSPWM. I haven't really had time to play with BSPWM and get it configured to my liking, so I actually logged out of BSPWM and logged back into into Awesome Window Manager to make this video tonight. As soon as I'm through recording, though, I'm going to log back into BSPWM, but I didn't have, the layouts and everything. The configuration in BSPWM was going to cause me some problems recording some of the scenes I wanted to record here in OBS, so I just logged into Awesome Window Manager just to do this. Also, of course, I got all my new audio equipment. I haven't touched it at all. I haven't played with it at all. The very first video I made Tuesday, when I got the equipment and played with it for about half an hour, just did some basic setting it up. I haven't touched it since then. I turned it off right after I made that video, and I hit the power button right before I started this live stream, so I haven't adjusted the settings, haven't had time to play with anything. It's just been a crazy busy work week for me. So tomorrow, again, I have a day off. I'd like to spend some time getting to know BSPWM a little better, and I'd like to play with some of this audio equipment tomorrow as well. So you guys, I'm going to put the YouTube chat back on screen. I'm going to get some of my stuff ready here. All right. I don't want to be streaming too late tonight, so we're going to get started here in just a second. By the way, Blue Moon is the beverage tonight. Yeah, Christian, your audio sounds absolutely fantastic to me. Well, it sounds pretty good, but I really haven't tweaked it at all. All I did was just some basic compression settings, kind of like the standard settings most people would set. I played with the EQ just a bit, but I haven't really played with it enough to take care of some of the noise suppression I would like to get rid of, also some of the explosives. So when you say S's and, T's, hard T's, sometimes you get that explosive, kind of sound that explodes in the mic. You get a real spike in volume. So I need to play with the settings to try to get some of that down. But as far as the tonal quality, yes, it sounds good. I agree with that. But this mic is a good mic. The raw audio from this mic is actually pretty good. Of course, it was an expensive mic. I bought this mic about a year ago, I think now. The Blue Baby Bottle SL. Yeah, so Blackworm is in the chat. Hi, DT in chat. How you doing, Blackworm? Will the audio crackling be fixed on Intel 2? We're going to get to that story here in just a second. So somebody was asking that in the chat. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. And even though I'm not going to go back and edit this and actually make this a clean and polished video, I don't like doing that kind of work. We're just going to keep everything, mistakes and everything in. I am going to do this like some of my pre-recorded taking into account, so I'll go ahead and do an intro here. All right, on this edition of Taking Into Account, the Linux Journal shuts down once again. Also, OSDisc is also going away. Also, some epic new hardware, building the default x86-64 kernel in under 16 seconds. Yes, that's now possible. We're going to get into that story as well. The Linux kernel 5.3 is out, and it will address the crackling audio issues on AMD PCs. As an AMD user, I'm very excited about this. Also, why Canonical views the Snap ecosystem as a compelling distro-agnostic solution. This story should be interesting as well. Also, a bit of FLOSS history. We're going to cover a bit of free, Libre, and open source history today. We're going to talk about a timeline of FLOSS history from 1980 to 2000. So these 5 stories and more on this edition of Taking Into Account. And that'd probably be a pretty good intro if I wanted to go back and edit this, but I'm not. However the live stream turns out, that's what's going on YouTube. All right. Power naps. Yeah, you're right about power naps. Big Pod. I like the power nap. Yeah, Steve Gunnick. Love me some raw and uncut. Talking about video or audio or both, or just this stream. All right, yeah. Thanks for the videos, taking your fans into account. Awesome, yeah. I installed Arch on a VM recently watching your vids, but I couldn't use it on my purpose, or so for whatever purpose you were using it. Yeah. Well, the Arch installation in a VM is really just to get you guys through an Arch install. Yeah, I know installing it in a VM is going to be different than installing it on your main machine. That installation, the instructions I gave you, were the steps I follow to install Arch on my equipment. It's going to be different on your equipment. You know, I did legacy BIOS. You might want to do EPYC. You know, I didn't set up a swap partition. You might want to swap partition. Some other things. I didn't do disk encryption. I didn't cover installing a desktop environment on that installation video, mainly because, I mean, what do you choose? It's going to be different for different people. So the main thing with that Arch VM installation video I did is just people are scared of the Arch installation. Just follow along with me, install it in a VM, and at least you can say, yes, you installed Arch. If you can install the Arch in a VM the way I did it, installing it on physical equipment, yes, you're going to have to do some different settings, different commands, but it's basically the same. The point is for you to get used to reading a wiki, putting some commands in the terminal, hitting enter. Right? That's all that is. It's a training exercise. And install it in a VM half a dozen times and you're good. You know, I think you'll get to the point where the command line install doesn't scare you anymore, and you'll be ready for anything. Arch, Gen 2, NixOS, whatever it is you want to get into. Well, maybe not NixOS. All right. So the first story on the docket tonight is the Linux Journal is shutting down once again, and OSDisc is also going away. Now, this story came to us, or it broke about a week ago, where the Linux Journal has decided they're ceasing publication, and Kyle Rankin over at the Linux Journal wrote this post here called An Awkward Goodbye, where basically it's awkward because they're saying goodbye basically for the second time in the past year. So Linux Journal about a year ago announced they were shutting down, and PIA, Private Internet Access, that particular company, decided to bail them out. They are going to take over, buy Linux Journal, take over and fund them and keep the operation going. Well, that lasted about 1 year. And then the Linux Journal still isn't making money, so they just couldn't turn things around, or they couldn't at least turn things around in a big enough way, fast enough for it to stay afloat. So PIA decided to pull the plug. So the Linux Journal is going by. Unfortunately, this came as a complete shock to the folks that worked at Linux Journal. None of them had any kind of heads up. It was basically, they read this post kind of like I'm reading this post to you guys. You know, they woke up one day and found out they were no longer employed. So it's very unfortunate. Some people are critical of Private Internet Access, that particular company, PIA, basically coming to the rescue of Linux Journal, and then within a year shutting it down. It's like you knew it wasn't making money when you decided to get involved, and did you really give it enough time to turn it around? The Linux journal, though, in my opinion, never adapted. The Linux journal started in 1994, I believe, right as the Linux operating system was, the GNU/Linux operating system was getting started. So the Linux journal was there from the very beginning as a print magazine. Print is dead. Print magazines is just dying, right? There's very few print publications that make any money these days, so they basically discontinued print publication and were trying to adapt to being an online magazine. And they were trying a lot of different things. They were doing, I think, a weekly podcast, and they were trying to be more of a web tech site or Linux site. And they just never caught on, right? It's one of those things, most people probably don't even know the Linux journal ever existed. Their articles didn't come up a lot in like Google search results because, again, they were late to the game as far as adapting to being a web magazine. So things like internet marketing and SEO were lacking, or it was just they were late into the game. They just never had enough time to really penetrate that market. Unfortunately, the Linux journal is no more. A few days after this story broke, OSDisc.com, which has been around forever, which is a website where you can go and buy DVDs, CDs, USB sticks with your favorite Linux distributions on those particular media. It's been around forever. Most people know about, well, I won't say most people know about it. If you've been around for a while, you've heard of OSDisc because certainly 5-10 years ago, when especially distributing CDs and DVDs of your favorite Linux distribution was very common, sharing CDs and DVDs of your favorite Linux distribution was very common. There were a lot of programs out there for sharing CDs, for example, where I get a CD from somebody, I install whatever version of Linux was on it, and then I pass it on to the next person in the chain, right? So, unfortunately, none of those programs really exist anymore. Ubuntu used to have a similar program where they basically you could request a free CD of Ubuntu or a number of free CDs with Ubuntu on it, and they'd ship it out to you, and then you could install Ubuntu, and then hopefully you shared it with other people. Nobody's doing that really anymore, and I guess nobody is even purchasing CDs, DVDs, USB sticks with your favorite distributions on it, or at least it wasn't enough for OSDisc to stay in operation. So sad days for Linux Journal and OSDisc. They are no more. All right, and that was our first story. Let's get back to the YouTube chat for a second. All right. Yeah, some big UK conglomerate owns the Linux journal. Last I read, the UK government is against open source. Well, probably most governments. I don't think it's just the US or the UK government or Chinese government. Governments are probably not. That's not a good breeding ground for free and open source software. Yeah, I heard about them a few days ago. Blackworm was at the Linux Journal or OSDisc or both. Yeah, the Linux Journal, like I said, it's been around for 25 years. And again, their articles just didn't come up in search results the way I think it should, because they did some fabulous articles, but it was articles designed for print, really. So they never adapted to, again, marketing, internet marketing. Search engine optimization, so you rank better in the search engines. Getting more clicks using techniques like clickbait, for example. They didn't do any of that. Basically, they just couldn't adapt to the brave new world that they had to adapt to survive. Yeah, I wouldn't trust discs sent to me by a stranger. Who knows if they tampered with it? Well, that's true. Hey, I'm finally made a DT taking into account. How you doing, Eric? Good to see you. You guys that are not subscribed to Eric Adams, he's got a YouTube channel too. And I see Peter Jansen is also in the chat. How you doing, Peter? All right. let's get back to the next story. All right, the next story on the docket tonight is there is some epic new hardware out there, and building the default x86-64 Linux kernel can be done somewhere between 15 and 20 seconds. We're going to call it 16 seconds since that's the title of this Phoronix article. So this article comes from Michael Larabelle, the owner and creator of Phoronix. Quote, it's now been 1 week since the launch of AMD's EPYC Rome processors with up to 64 cores. Wow, 128 threads per socket. That's a monster CPU, right? That's crazy. Anyway, to make a long story short here, Michael Larabelle has been able to test some insane equipment. You know, I'm sure he's got tons of really high-end processors. He has never been able to compile a Linux kernel in under 20 seconds. He was able to compile the Linux kernel with the EPYC Rome CPU under 16 seconds. It was between 15 and 16 seconds. He was able to compile the kernel. That's insane. And that's the big generic kernel, right? That's not a stripped down kernel. That's crazy. That is unbelievable. Some other compilation times, GCC, for those of you that have ever had to compile GCC, I've compiled it before on both ARCH and of course source-based installs like Gentoo, you have to compile. GCC takes forever to compile. On the EPYC, he was able to compile it in 128.97 seconds. Wow. That is, and he was able to compile a LLVM stack in 82 seconds. And these are things that typically take forever. I mean, a long time. You know, on mediocre hardware, it's not unusual to spend a couple hours compiling something like GCC, for example. So when you're measuring these compilation times in seconds, that is insane. I'm very, very happy with my AMD Threadripper. I have a 12-core, 24-thread Threadripper, and I'll be honest, it never misses a beat. I can't slow this thing down. I can't throw enough stuff at my Threadripper to cause it to even flinch, right? 64 cores, 128 threads. I don't know what you would do with something like that. And I say this as somebody, right now I'm streaming live, I'm recording video, I've got browser with about a dozen tabs open, I've got YouTube chat open, I've also got the IRC chat open, I've got a lot of stuff going on this computer right now, and I'm doing it all with CPU encoding. I'm not using the GPU to stream this. I'm actually using CPU encoding right now. If I opened up HTOP, I doubt I'd be using 30% of the CPU right now. And that is incredible, you know. And that's with a 12-core Threadripper. Now imagine 64 cores. So it's just insane. 16-second compile time for the kernel. I want one. I'm not going to buy one, though. To be honest, I like buying some of my audio equipment recently. I mentioned, you know, I went a little overboard buying some of this stuff. It's overkill for what I really need. But yeah, that kind of CPU would definitely be overkill. I'd probably never even use 10% of that CPU. And that's, you know, recording, streaming, maybe having a dozen VMs open, still probably wouldn't use 10% of that thing. So. All right, back to the chat for a second. I think I lost some of the chat here. Let me see if I can scroll back and... Yeah, I love Phoronix, great news sites, but the last article about the AMD PSP was odd. I didn't catch that one. But you mentioned you love Phoronix and it's a great site. I agree. Some people are critical of Phoronix. I don't understand why. Michael Larabelle, it's basically a one-man operation. Think about that. How many articles come out daily on Phoronix, and it's a one-man operation. That guy is a machine to put out all that content. I know over on the R Linux subreddit, they don't want you to post links to Phoronix. They call it link spam. Because to them, well, let me pull up a Phoronix article. to them, typically most of Michael's articles are usually covering other stories on the internet, and he'll link to the articles in his story. So the R Linux guys, they just want you to link to the original story that he's referencing instead of referencing Phoronix. Although for his benchmarking stuff, I mean, this is original content. This is unique content to himself. But even that, that it's like you get flagged on that R Linux subreddit anytime you post anything from Phoronix, and I don't know why. I think it's great as well. All right. Somebody's talking about a 1200 baud modem. I hope not. C. Doss the Boss, how are you doing? He said yes. He was answering a question. Let's see what was probably Sleepy Eyes Vince. I was asking about the EPYC processors, server line processors. Yes. Matter of fact, I should have mentioned. He was Michael Larabelle at Phoronix. He didn't just do the compilation tests with the EPYC processors. He also threw in a couple of Xeons here. And the EPYC processors, of course, were better than the Xeons, so that's why I didn't bother mentioning them. All right. Hey, DT, what distro are you using since Manjaro decided to sell their fans for free? Well, the Manjaro guys changed course, so I still have Manjaro on one of my laptops, but I've been using Arco on my main production machine for about 4 months. But I was happy to see the Manjaro guys change their plans. And I'm really glad that some of you guys in the community raised hell about that FreeOffice thing. Because don't you doubt it for a second, they were going to install FreeOffice by default had people not complained. And that I don't think that was going to be a positive thing for Linux or for free and open source software. All in all, us complaining actually got some positive results because they're not going to install it by default, which is, of course, what I wanted in particular. I don't want proprietary software installed by default when it's not necessary. But we also got, for those of you that do want FreeOffice, they agreed to have an option in the installer in Manjaro where if you do want it, it's just a tick away. Also, the FreeOffice guys agreed to make their free trialware version of FreeOffice a little more usable in the Linux version anyway, where their free version now will let you export and save in some of the proprietary Microsoft formats that before they weren't going to let you do unless you paid for the pro version of FreeOffice. So all in all, great outcome. But I wish they had started with all of that, and we didn't have to have this big uproar from the community. But all right, yeah, Villico3, hello, first time catching the stream. Hey, welcome aboard, glad to have you. Yeah, I've been using Arco Awesome lately, and it's been a chore, but a fun one to learn. Yeah, Arco Awesome is what I installed on this machine, and then installed 7 or 8 other window managers also alongside Awesome. Let's see. Yeah, Jessica, yeah. Us complaining did something. Yeah. It was definitely, a good thing. Don't think that the community doesn't have an impact, right? That your voice isn't heard. Sleepy Eyes, nice work on Destination Linux, DT. Thanks, Vince. Appreciate you checking that out. That was fun. I was happy to get to sit in with those guys. So Zeb from Destination Linux has been missing for a couple of weeks, and they've been trying to get some guest hosts, and they asked me to do their show this past week, and it was great. I had a blast. Yeah, we're getting a new minimal install plus choosing which office suite we want. Yeah, the Manjaro thing. Yeah, very good outcome from that. All right. And let's move it along again. So some of you folks in Europe don't have to be up, till daylight. All right, the next story on the docket is the latest kernel, Linux 5.3, will address crackling audio on AMD PCs. So this is interesting because if you've got an AMD computer running Linux, and I've always run AMD on everything, crackling audio has been an issue. I can attest to that. Probably most of you guys in the YouTube chat that run AMD can also attest to sometimes the audio can be a little flaky. You'll get some weird crackling, or sometimes recording. You think recording the audio is just fine. You go back and listen to it, and it's like there's some frames missing. There's some hiccups along the way, and you don't know really what caused it. Yeah, I had that especially on my old machine, the one before this machine that I bought about 4 months ago, and looks like Linux 5.3 will finally address the issue with audio input on systems with AMD processors. So the fix, I'm not exactly sure what the fix is, but I don't think it's a legit fix. They're calling it a workaround. Mainly, that means we're able to hack the kernel in such a way to fix that crackling issue, but it's not really a fix to whatever the real problem is. But that's not the point, right? For at least for us as consumers. The point is, hopefully that crackling audio issue goes away. I know the very first thing that popped in my head when I read this is, will this finally fix Discord? For those of you that use Discord, I'm sure you've logged into a voice chat in Discord before and got that crazy static in your headphones. And you don't know why, you don't know what causes it, you can't fix it. I don't think that particular issue has anything to do with this, though. I don't think this will fix Discord. I think Discord and Linux, there's something screwy with it. So, if any of you guys in the chat have some suggestions for how to fix the staticky audio in Discord, I'd love to hear about it. I know I've Googled it before, and people have given me config files, Pulse audio config files especially, change this line in this config, or this setting in this config. I've never been able to get it to go away, though. And it's not just a me problem. There's thousands of us that use Discord on Linux, and it's the same, Half the time you log in to Discord and go to a voice chat, all you get is just this crazy loud static. And it doesn't last forever, oddly enough. It'll last for like 3 or 4 minutes and then go away. You don't know what caused it to start. You don't know what finally caused it to go away. It's just one of those things. It's gremlins in the system. All right. And let's check in with our IRC chat. It could be sponsored by some beer brand. So yeah, we're sponsored this evening by Blue Moon. If I can. Blue Moon, Belgian White. Of course, it's Belgian White. That's the style of beer, but it's an American beer. I love Belgian beers, true Belgian beers. I love Hoegaarden. I love Leffy. Stella Artois is not bad in a pinch. It's not my favorite, but Stella works too. All right, back to the YouTube chat for a second. All right. Will it fix Intel too? So yeah, no on that. That's an AMD fix only for AMD audio, unfortunately. I don't have any Intel machines, so I'm not even sure what you're referring to as far as audio issues with Intel. So I can't even comment on that, unfortunately. The only processors I run have always been AMD, mainly because I'm cheap. I'm kind of the budget kind of guy. I appreciate the super chat there, Tuck Stop. Thank you, DT, for your effort and time in producing the videos. Thank you, sir. Or madam, I don't know. I always assume, though, without any other information, because it's Linux, it does seem like it's a male-dominated kind of niche, right? And that's unfortunate, especially just tech in general, programming, developing. It's very male-dominated. There's not enough women that get involved in this. Also, when you start talking about race and ethnicity, it tends to be Caucasian and Asian as far as developers and programmers. We need more people of color. You know, I mean, really, we need more African Americans and Latinos, and we need more of the world to get involved in computer programming and just nerdy stuff like GNU/Linux and free and open source software. All right, yeah, Belgian beer is delicious. Agreed. Knit 5124. Just extreme crackling and noise. Discord has nothing to do with it. And the microphone is fine. Yeah. Yeah, the Discord thing has always bugged me. Of course, I don't use Discord that much. I don't like Discord. The only time I use Discord is if I happen to be doing a gaming stream or something on my channel, which is something I almost never do. But if I did and I wanted to interact with you guys in the community, like, hey, you guys join me in a game and we'll chat, and and I'll record it live on YouTube. How are we gonna all chat with each other? Well, we're gonna log into Discord, of course. That's what Discord is for. Is really for gaming, is to communicate with your fellow gamers, and it's great for that. But I don't do much of that, so I don't have to deal with Discord that much. But those few times I log into Discord a year, yeah, it's got some issues audio-wise. Yeah, DT, I wouldn't be able to drink and stream at the same time. I became a horrible person when I'm drunk. I've drank about 1/3 of this beer. Drunk, what are you doing? How much are you drinking while you stream? Yeah, Jessica, we need more women in this field. I absolutely agree with that. Do you use the Discord web app or web interface? No, I use the desktop client for those that were wondering that. I usually avoid web clients. I don't like doing everything in the browser. If something's got a desktop client, that's typically what I use. So when I use Discord or Zoom or pretty much anything that's got a desktop client, I always use the desktop client. I never fool with the web clients. I don't even like, at my work, I'm forced to use Office 365. I hate that. I mean, I don't like using Office anyway, but give me the desktop Microsoft Office clients. Don't put everything in the browser. Not what the browser was for. You shouldn't be creating spreadsheets in the browser, in Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge or whatever they're shipping with these days. DT, you should drink the beers from the Abbeys, the Trappiste. Yep, good beers. Another great Belgian beer I had, it's extremely expensive when I find it, but it's really good. I got to think of it. It'll come to me in a minute. Comes in a bigger bottle, like a single bottle. I'll remember it in a minute. One of the best beers I've ever had, though. But it's like, the last time I bought it, it was like $20 for that one bottle. Let's see. Mumble is free and open source software. Yes, it is. And I have actually never played with Mumble, ever. I don't know anything about Mumble. I should actually check out Mumble. Got to do that at some point. Yeah, the desktop Discord client is pretty much just the web client. Okay. To fix the Discord audio issues, my best bet was Ripcord, but there's still the bass noise issue in there. Yeah. Single bottle, anything related, 80 proof or higher, please. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm not a hard liquor drinker. I mean, not on the regular anyway. But, a few times a year, I'll buy me a nice bottle of scotch or maybe a nice bottle of bourbon. Not the cheap stuff. Top shelf. All right, let's get back to the topics here. So this next topic is actually one I had lined up for doing on taking into account last week, had I done an episode of taking into account last week, but I put it off because I knew I would be recording with the Destination Linux guys on Sunday last week. And I knew this topic was going to come up on that show, so I didn't do it. But you know what? I thought it's an important enough topic. I went ahead and put it on this week's show because there's some stuff worth discussing in this. All right. Let me get this set up here. All right, so the fourth story on the docket tonight is why Canonical views the Snap ecosystem as a compelling distribution-agnostic solution. So this article comes from my favorite author, my favorite author over at Tech Republic, Mr. James Sanders. Me and James, we have some history. Both him and I caught a lot of flack a few weeks ago on one of my episodes of Taking Into Account because I covered Mr. Sanders' article about Linux Mint. You guys might remember that episode. Apparently, a lot of people really thought that was a horrible article by James, but I thought it was a great article, which is why I covered it on Taking Into Account. But let's not get on that topic. So, Canonical's Martin Wimpress. You guys know Martin Wimpress, Wimpy, who, of course, is the lead for the Ubuntu Mate project. He was a longtime Canonical employee, and he sat down to be interviewed by Mr. Sanders, and he talks about snaps mainly. He talks a lot about snap packs and how they relate to the competition, Flatpak and app images, and he talked a little bit about the nature of the Snap Store and everything. So let's talk about some of the more interesting things that was asked of Martin Wimpress, and I thought some of his answers are a little strange. So first of all, what are snaps? So snaps actually predate both Flatpak and app image. Canonical started creating the snap format before Flatpak and app image came into being. Snaps basically evolved from click packages. There was a package format called click back in the Ubuntu phone days. So they were already doing this kind of containerized packaging format. They called it click and it evolved. They changed the name to snap. Now we have snaps. Some of the things that people criticize snaps the most over are the fact that snaps, you only have one central repository. You have snapcraft.io, the website snapcraft.io. That is your central hub for all things Snap, right? Canonical, of course, owns the website. They own the servers. They own the back end, and it's all proprietary software that's running on those servers. It's not open sourced at all. So you can't go create your own Snapcraft hub thingy and have your own repositories of snap packs, and you can't just make your own snap packs and people can go get your snap packs. No, everything is in Snapcraft. That is the only place you can get it, and that's been one of the points, that's been one of the things people are most critical of as far as snap packages. I kind of get why they chose to do the central repository. Now, initially I was very critical of snaps not having an open source backend as far as their servers and allowing people to host their own repositories of snaps and things like that, but I get why they do the central snap store. From a consumer point of view, most people expect your app store to be one location, right? I go to this one location and all my apps are right there. I don't have to go search all over the internet to find some snap pack for whatever it is I'm looking for. I know it's going to be at snapcraft.io, or if I pull up the Snap Store on whatever Linux distribution I have the Snap Store installed on, if it's a Snap, it's going to be in that store. There's no other alternative. It's either in the store or it doesn't exist. So I get why Canonical goes that route. It makes sense from a consumer point of view. It makes app discovery so much easier when you know exactly where all the snaps are. But from a free and open source point of view, I don't like having this proprietary backend, especially when your company is built on free and open source software, right? That's kind of what you're pushing. You're pushing open source in a big way. And, the back end of some of this stuff is proprietary. It was the same with the old Ubuntu One cloud syncing service years ago. All of the servers for that were all proprietary, and people complained about it for the cloud service. I understand why they did it for that as well, for security reasons. I mean, they have all that cloud syncing, the servers and all locked down. You don't want to just share everything with the world. But still, if you're Canonical or other big companies, Linux companies, Red Hat, SUSE, they all kind of have some proprietary stuff, in their past or in their present. I don't know. I think you should try to be as open source as possible. And I think the Snap Store is one. Canonical could open source this thing if they wanted to. This is a little bit different than Ubuntu One, the cloud service. The Snap Store, they could just open source it. They could allow people to make their own snaps without using the Snap tool. They could allow people to host their own Snap repositories instead of having everything in the central repository. And I think it would create a lot of goodwill with the community. Canonical would get far less hate regarding snaps if they would just do this. And I don't know why they're not doing it. When Martin Wimpress was asked in this interview why they don't do it, he said it was because Canonical doesn't see a benefit in open sourcing it. That's not a good answer. I like Martin Wimpress. I think he's a good guy. I know he's a good guy. But that's not a good answer. That Canonical doesn't see the benefit in open sourcing some of this stuff. Like I said, just the goodwill from the community from doing this is the benefit. That's why you need to do it. Now, another interesting point here from Martin Wimpress was he mentioned that the Linux Mint lead developer, Clement Lefebvre, called out Snap as a threat. So Clem over at Mint sees Snap packages as a threat. And that is why Mint recently in some of their releases took snaps out of Mint. They took all the pre-installed Snap stuff, so Snapd, removed it, no Snap Store, and they have Flatpaks enabled by default in Mint. Rather than using the Snap structure that's already there, you're basing on Ubuntu. Snaps are installed by default. You're ripping all that stuff out and putting Flatpaks in as Mint. And I've been critical of that. I've never understood why Mint does that. Why are you basing off of Ubuntu and then you're ripping out some of the best parts of Ubuntu? If you're going to do that, just base off of Debian or any other distro. But Clem apparently says snaps are a threat because Canonical owns the store. They own the servers. I get that. They own the repository, but guess what? Mint, you're already basing off Ubuntu. You've been using Ubuntu repos for decades. Well, not decades, but over a decade. This is strange. If you're basing your distribution off of Ubuntu, you already trust Ubuntu with everything, pretty much. I mean, you're basically. This is strange. I think Clem, if he really thinks snaps are a threat as far as to Linux Mint, I don't agree with that. I think he's way off base. I think he's throwing shade on Ubuntu where it's not really needed in that aspect because, again, you're basing off Ubuntu. You already trust Ubuntu with their main repositories. Why don't you trust them with the Snap repositories? It's just, I don't get that. Now, Martin Wimpress did say that on Linux distributions other than Ubuntu, you can, of course, install snaps. You can install the Snap Store, and Canonical, even though it would be perfectly in their right to have Canonical branding all over this stuff and, Ubuntu branding, they rip all of that stuff out when you install snaps in the Snap Store on other distributions. And I don't have any machines running Ubuntu at the moment. And I can attest, I've got snaps and the Snap Store on most of my equipment. They rip the branding out, right? You can see a screenshot here. It's not branded Canonical or Ubuntu. It's branded with this blue background and the Fedora logo, if it's installed in Fedora. And I imagine it's the same on SUSE or Arch or whatever it is you intend to install the Snap Store. So they're trying to make this thing as distro-agnostic as possible. I give them credit on that. And to be honest, I am a huge fan of Snap Packs. I actually use all three, Snaps, Flatpaks, App Images. They all work. And I don't see them as competitors with each other. I think they're not really competing formats, right? You can install all three on your system, and it does no harm having snaps and Flatpaks and App Images all on your system. So I've never understood this competing mentality that people have where you can only use one of the three. And who decided that? I think a lot of people throw unnecessary shade also on both snaps and Flatpaks because of corporations behind them. Canonical creates snaps, you know, and Flatpak was created by Red Hat. Ooh, the evil companies, you know. A lot of Linux fanboys, myself included, we're kind of anti-corporation, right? We're anti-big business. So obviously we have a natural aversion maybe to things like snaps and Flatpaks. That's why so many people are really pushing AppImage. AppImage is, I guess, the community format we should all be going with. Back to the YouTube chat for a second, guys. No, I went off on a little bit of a long rant on that. I could talk about snaps all day, though. I do like snaps, though. And what's weird is I'm actually a big fan of snaps. And I actually like Ubuntu as a distro. But in this article, there were a couple of things that I think do deserve to be criticized as far as the actions of Canonical. They really need to open source the back end of the Snap Store. If they did that, it would be perfect. Nobody would have any legitimate complaint about Snap at that point, in my opinion. Now, I know some people, oh, snaps, you know, it's, you know, large packages and it's bloat and whatever. Yeah, you don't understand containerized formats if you're worried about bloat with, you know, these container formats. Obviously, yeah, there's some extra packages and, you know, there's some extra disk space involved when you do anything with containers, whether it be snaps, Flatpaks, AppImages, Docker containers, what have you, you know. Anybody that complains about the size of snap packs, I usually just ignore. So I was like, that's not a real criticism. They're like, there's things to be critical about, but that's not one of them. All right. Roll back up in the chat. All right. Chris Titus, how you doing, sir? I got to catch up on some of your videos, Chris. I think I've missed the last two. They're in my watch list, though. I might catch them this evening. Yeah, Gnostic. StarCraft and Warcraft are my faves. Yeah. I've never played either StarCraft or Warcraft. I did play some of the other Blizzard games. Played Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. Classics. I loved the very first Diablo game. Boy, I just dated myself, you know, because that game is very old now. Which distribution do you use? I'm on Arco Linux on the main production machine. So, Debian, Fedora, or Arch? All three. I mean, is that a question? So, and of course, Chris Titus also. Why not all three? Yeah. So, on my workstations, you know, my typical desktop laptops, I like the Arch base these days. Fedora ain't bad. If I wasn't going to run Arch and I wanted a static release model, Fedora is probably what I would go with. Debian's a great server distro. So anytime I'm doing anything server related, it's either Debian stable or Ubuntu LTS server. Sometimes CentOS. Throw CentOS in there too. But yeah, all great distros. It depends on what you're doing. There's no one-size-fits-all distro anyway. Let's see. I see Yu-Gi-Oh! Masters in the chat. Yeah. Lunduk dissed Gentoo again. What did Lunduk say about Gentoo? I'm confused, but why is that news? A lot of people have probably dissed Gentoo. Have you used Gentoo? No. If you've used Gentoo, there's a lot to diss. I know I'm going to catch hell about that here in a minute, some of the Gentoo fanboys, but I don't like compiling. And I've got decent equipment. No, I don't like compiling. Just give me pre-built binaries. I don't want to build everything from source. A waste of my time. Now, again, it's a waste of my time. Some of you guys may have a real need to build everything from source, to custom build all of your packages with the right use flags and everything. For me, just give me all the use flags and everything. Give me the big kernel. Basically, give me Arch. So that's why I'm on Arch. So, Fedora and Arch are my faves, yeah. Mint does have a Debian spin. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they really focus on the Debian spin. It's like they created the thing mainly as kind of a testing ground, kind of, testing the waters in case they ever want to jump ship from Ubuntu. Which, to be honest, when you read things like what I read a minute ago about Clem, seeing things like snap packs and the snapd daemon and the snap store and all of that, being already there on Mint as a threat, and that's why they rip it all out. Why are you basing it on Ubuntu? Like when you start taking out some of the fundamental stuff that's already pre-built in Ubuntu, why are you basing off of it? Like, I really think the Mint team, if they really dislike Ubuntu as much as they seem to in some of their writings, just move on to something else. Just move on to Debian. I don't think it would be that big of a change for them to just base off of Debian testing or whatever they want to move to. Yeah, the Snap Store isn't fully open. That's correct. You need to invest in a 64-core Threadripper. Now, if you're talking about the compile times, yeah, that would get the compile times down. But even then, you still have to compile, even if it takes seconds. It's still seconds that are wasted. Just give me a pre-built binary. And I say it's wasted. It's wasted on me because I don't want to custom build my software. If I did, then obviously those seconds wouldn't be wasted. But for me, I'd be losing minutes a day at least updating because of the compile times. Yeah. I don't have that much free time, unfortunately. Yeah, Chris Titus, yeah, you use the CentOS server. Yeah, CentOS servers are great. I've used them, and I like them. Stable as hell. I mean, it's like Debian stable. It's just RPM based rather than Deb based. Yeah, Debian is far superior anyway. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Funny thing, he is a musician too. There's something with musicians being good with software. First programmers often were recruited because they were musicians. Wow, I did not know that, Peter. Musicians, it makes sense because musicians usually are pretty strong with math skills. Math skills have certainly helped with programming. Having a good fundamental understanding of logic helps. So, yeah, I could see how the musical background would help with something like that. All right, move on to the last story here. Trying to knock these out in a timely fashion. All right, and the fifth and final story on the docket tonight is a bit of FLOSS history. For those of you not familiar with that particular acronym, FLOSS stands for Free, Libre, and Open Source Software. Typically, I just leave the L out of it, and I just call it FOSS, Free and Open Source Software. Some people prefer free, Libre, and open source software. Pick your poison as far as what term you use, but I came across this over on Reddit. So over on the R Linux subreddit, somebody was nice enough to post this. I don't know if he created this himself or he found it somewhere on the internet. It's probably very old because it's only the FLOSS timeline from 1980 to the year 2000, so it covers a 20-year bit of history. But I think it's interesting. So I just wanted to share this because many of you guys probably very new to Linux, don't know much of the history about it, or particularly you don't know much about the free software movement and the open source software movement. So let's start first with the beginning of the timeline. 1981 was the fall of MIT's AI lab hacker community. So that was when the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, basically, that hacker community was dismantled. Most of them went on to work for proprietary software companies. Richard Stallman, of course, was at the MIT lab. Eventually, Richard Stallman quits his job with MIT to work on the GNU project. He did that in the year 1984. In 1985, RMS starts work on Emacs. The Emacs text editor, if you will, although it does much more than just being a plain text editor. So Stallman and some of his colleagues start Emacs. The Free Software Foundation was created shortly after that, in 1986, around 1986. So that was really when the free software movement really started going. We saw the creation of the GNU project, Emacs, and the Free Software Foundation. Now we've got all these GNU utilities, including Emacs, and we've got free software. People are starting to adopt it, but we don't really have an operating system yet. We don't have a kernel. We don't get to the kernel until 1991. Linus Torvalds develops a free kernel called Linux. Of course, from there, the GNU utilities plus the kernel, we have our operating system. So you can say that was born. Really, the first GNU/Linux distributions were in 1993, 1 month apart. Slackware was it wasn't the first, but it's the oldest still in existence. A month later, Debian was started by Ian Murdoch. 1994, we see the emergence of Red Hat. Also, the emergence of the Apache group. Of course, Apache is the company or the organization that created the Apache web server that we all know and love and pretty much runs most of the internet. First Red Hat distribution showed up on the scene around 1995. The first version of KDE shows up around 96, GNOME, 1997, 1998. The term open source is coined. One of the first people to start using that term is a guy named Eric Raymond. If you haven't read the book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar by Eric Raymond, you should pick up that book. It's great as far as some history regarding free and open source software. But in 1998, Eric Raymond and Linus Torvalds and a bunch of other people, they had a problem with calling this software free software because free has a different meaning in the English language than what Richard Stallman was trying to put out there, free as in freedom. No, when you say free software here to English speakers, native English speakers, we think free as in free of charge, or as this is really cheap software. Low quality software is basically what you're telling me. This is, garbage software, free software. No, they wanted to get away from that term because it was negative. They were doing testing with audiences, telling them, hey, what do you think about free software? And everybody has a negative reaction to that. So they started playing around with the term open source software, and people were largely receptive of open source as the term describing this kind of software, especially businesses. Businesses hated the idea of free software. Free software means cheap, no cost, low quality, has no support. Where open source, really emphasizes the fact, not that it's free of cost, but that the source code's open, you can modify it, millions of people can work on it, that sort of thing, and businesses really loved that aspect. So the term open source really caught on in a much bigger way than the term free software ever caught on, which has always caused some disagreements between the free software crowd, Stallman in particular, and then people like Eric Raymond and Linus Torvalds. We also, in the timeline, I didn't mention the rise of Netscape. So Netscape came around the mid-90s, proprietary browsers, web browsers, but then later they released the code, made it open source, and the project becomes the Mozilla project that we all know and love, Firefox, Thunderbird. And the Qt project starts in 1999. Trolltech releases Qt under the GPL, which is GNU's General Public License. That is a bit of a 20-year timeline for free and open source software. I thought this was pretty neat. And, again, I know many of you guys are probably not familiar with much of that history, so I thought it was kind of cool to revisit that. Back to the chat for a second. Yeah, Dark One. Manjaro usually holds back updates for a bit. Yeah, so they hold back about 2 weeks, typically. If you're doing their standard, what they call stable releases, if you want to be rolling along at the same speed as Arch, you can do it. They have kind of like an unstable branch, but it's not unstable. Like Debian stable and Debian unstable are two completely different things. Arch holding or Manjaro holding packages back 2 weeks, or just going with the standard Arch cadence. It's not much difference in that. I'm not sure if holding packages back 2 weeks really makes Manjaro more stable or not. I've never had any major breakages on Manjaro though, so maybe there's something to it. I've had a lot of minor breakages with Manjaro, but I've had a lot of minor breakages on mainline Arch as well. It just seems like you get the same breakages, they just happen 2 weeks later, right? The same thing that broke on Arch is going to break in Manjaro, it just happens 2 weeks later. Yeah, Dark One, I'm a Manjaro user personally, yeah. So I made most of my content in 2018 using Manjaro on my main production machine, almost all of 2018. Now, I hopped a lot in 2018. But I would always hop to something for a couple weeks, and I kept going back to Manjaro though, because Manjaro just worked. Typically, I don't like wiping out working installations either. Like if I install something and it just works, typically I'll leave it on for 2-3 months. I'm not always itching to just blow away a perfectly good Linux install. Which I know some of you guys in the chat probably find amusing, because you would think I'm hopping like every other day, but I really don't distro hop that much. I do distro hop, but not that much. Yes. Silly Baboy. I hope I pronounced that right. You used Mandrake Linux once before the merge. Had a horrible experience. Mandrake was one of the more popular Linux distributions, about 15 years ago or so? So Mandrake was one of the more user-friendly distros back in its heyday. Of course, that was before Ubuntu arrived on the scene. Ubuntu, if we're talking timeline, we're going past 2000 now. Ubuntu appeared in 2004. I think Gentoo appeared around then, 2002. I think for Gentoo, Arch appeared around 2004. So that's some of the, when you get past that 2000 timeline, you start seeing the rise of Ubuntu and Gentoo and Arch. Where before that, yeah, it was all Debian, Slackware, and Red Hat. And, you know, some of the distros based on Red Hat. SUSE, of course, was already on the scene before 2000. Appreciate the super chat there, Grayson. Hi Derek, I love your audio setup. My suggestion, use the EQ first before the compressor. EQ can cut some bad frequencies before compressor takes effect. I thought about trying that out, Grayson. I think I am going to go back and change the chain here. And do, preamp into the EQ, into the compressor, into the mixer. I'm going to try that. So, thanks for the suggestion. Oddly enough, when I looked on the internet to see how most people were doing it, there's no consensus on any of this stuff. Some people tell you do compressor, then EQ. Some people tell you do EQ, then the compressor. Of course, I guess it depends on what you're doing. Are you doing voice? Are you just doing voice as in radio or podcasting? Are you doing vocal music? What style of music? Is it something aggressive like rap, hip-hop, or metal? Is it something a little more softer, mellow? Maybe that plays into it. Are you doing instrumental? Of course, what instrumental? Something like guitar is very different than drums, which is very different than my trombone if I pulled it out, right? So, it's going to be something I have to experiment with. So I'm going to have to spend probably a lot of time before I really fine-tune everything to get the sound I want. Although, again, just plugging everything in and just kind of going with some of the defaults, it doesn't sound bad. But I think tomorrow, like I said, I have a day off tomorrow. I'm going to play with some of the audio equipment a little bit tomorrow. And I hope to play with BSPWM tomorrow too and try to configure that thing a bit more than what I've already got set up. I like BSPWM, what I've seen so far, but I realized trying to do this live stream tonight, I didn't have it set up to where I could do some of the scenes I'm doing in OBS. So I need to set some of that stuff up. Let's see. Yeah, definitely run your compressor toward the end of the audio chain. Says Z Dizzles Rizzle. Thank you, sir. Z Dizzle Rizzle. Great name, by the way. Yeah. Deutsch. Got you live again. Good to see you. All right. Do something unique like Void. Do you believe something like Void will thrive? Or be one-off, not being part of a larger family? Void's been around now a couple of years, and they lost their main dev about 1.5 years ago. And that didn't kill them, so Void's doing okay. Yeah, Keegan, the Tennessean. How you doing, Keegan? Long time no see. Let's see. I heard the DL guys were looking for ways to make the show better, so they had you on. The DL guys are doing just fine without me, but I was happy to sit in with them this week. For those of you that are not subscribed, check out Destination Linux. You should see it in my subscriptions if you go to my channels tab on my YouTube page. Yeah, DT, what phone and mobile OS do you use? So recently I bought a new phone. I had to buy a new phone about 1.5 weeks ago. My phone that I was using was a LG V30 or something. It's a really crappy phone. I hated it. Had it almost 2 years, and it had broken updates, and half the apps on it crashed, and I was just so fed up. I went to the store. I didn't even listen to the salesperson. I walked to the salesperson and I said, I want the Samsung Galaxy 10 Plus. I already knew, because I've had the Samsung phones before, and they are just rock solid, stable. You know, they don't break. They're just really good phones. I know they're expensive, but I've got the 10 Plus, and it's just a gorgeous phone. It's just, I like the size of it. Not too big, not too small. The glass is good. It's got a good camera. The speakers are not bad. And it was not cheap, but hey. As far as the OS, of course, it's an Android phone. I've never bought an Apple product. Well, I haven't bought an Apple product in a very, very, very long time. Let's put it that way. The last time I used an Apple computer was an actual Macintosh computer. I'm talking early 90s. Now, back when the iPod first came on the scene, I did buy one of their iPods, you know, the little MP3 players, which actually was one of the things that really sparked the massive growth of Apple, you know, during the Steve Jobs era. The iPod was insanely popular. I did have one of them. I never bought one of their phones. I've never had an iPhone. Don't ever plan on buying an iPhone. Never had a MacBook. None of the modern versions of the Mac OS. Don't know anything about them. I'm sure they're fine. I just choose not to go that route. Of course, not going that route, and then I'm on Android. That's not great either. I wish we had a real Linux phone, and I know somebody in the chat is probably going to tell me about Purism. We've got to see what these Librem 5 phones look like when they ship. I don't like the specs. What they've told us so far, the specs look pretty garbage, to be honest. For a phone, that phone, they're saying that's going to be like a $700 or $800 phone. I paid $799 for this phone. This phone has 4 or 5 times the storage of what the Librem 5 is going to have. Got a much better screen resolution, probably much better glass, certainly a much better camera, faster processor. Everything about this phone is so much better than that Librem 5. Oh, but it's a Linux phone. It's a real Linux phone. Yes, I'm not going to pay $800 for a phone that should probably cost $200 if you're basing it off the specs, just because it runs Linux. I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. Back to the chat for a second. Yeah, I almost always listen to the unedited Destination Linux. Yeah, sometimes it's close to 4 hours. Yeah, Steve, I had no idea how long they would be recording on Sunday. I was prepared for a marathon recording session. We actually did not spend that long. We probably were there 2.5 hours, maybe. The total runtime was 2 hours once Michael edited it and uploaded it, because I've seen that the runtime was right at 2 hours. We didn't do like any extra takes, or there's not anything that was really cut out, just a little bit of dead air between some of the takes. But for the most part, what you saw in the edited version was how we did it live. So the recording actually went a bit quicker than what I was expecting. So I was kind of happy about that too, because you guys know, I don't edit much in my stuff anyway. We just go with whatever. However these takes come out, that's what gets published to YouTube. I don't like editing content. I don't fix mistakes. Basically, I'm lazy. So, yeah, Telcerus. Oh crap, I'm late AF. Yes, you're very late. We've already finished the 5 stories I originally were going to cover. Been streaming about an hour and 15 minutes. I didn't want to be on too late tonight. Well, I did kind of rush through the stories a little bit, although I did take my time with the Canonical snap story. Yeah, Lineage OS. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Linux mobile operating systems. I mean, we had the Yala phones back in the day, and we had WebOS, and there's been like a half a dozen of these things pop up. The Ubuntu Touch. I mean, I can think of about 6 or 7 that have appeared in the last decade. True GNU Linux kind of operating systems on mobile devices. None of them sold. None of them caught on. Really, I think for Linux, a real Linux operating system to catch on the phone, you need a company, a real company, a big company, like a big mobile company, like Samsung, to make their own operating system based on Linux. For example, I think most people, when they go buy a phone like the Samsung phones, or the iPhones, or, in China, some of the Huawei phones, some of the big company phones, they're going to buy that hardware. They don't know anything about the operating system on the phone. They just know it's a good phone, it's got a good camera, got good glass. Samsung could get rid of Android on all its devices tomorrow and put a true Linux mobile operating system on their phones. Nobody would probably notice. So, yeah, DT, Android is Linux. Of course, I'm aware of that, Big Pod, and I'm aware of that. So I don't know why you posted that. Are you trying to troll me? Yes, Android uses the Linux kernel, but that's not the GNU/Linux operating system that, Android is just a bunch of Java and the Linux kernel. You could actually say Chrome OS is actually more Linux than Android. Chrome OS at least boots off of a Gentoo kernel. Gentoo is kind of the build system that they use to create Chrome OS. Yeah, Chris Titus, I don't blame DT for not editing that much. Yes. Yeah, I don't like editing. I record for about 2 hours for 6 hours. Yeah. That's about the same for me. So, like, if I do these taking into account episodes, typically the runtime is about 30 minutes once I edit it and publish it, if I wasn't doing it live. What you guys see is a 30-minute video. That 30-minute video took me a little over an hour to record because of mistakes, retakes, pauses. Then I edit the video. Editing the video takes at least an hour. Then after I get the video edited, then I got to render the video. Now on this machine, the video rendering goes pretty quick. My previous machine, it took forever. Then you need to create a thumbnail. Then you need to upload it to YouTube. Takes a while for it to upload to YouTube. Then you got to create your title and timestamps. Yeah, so a 30-minute video that I typically do, like a 4-hour process. Typically. Sometimes it could run a little longer than that. Yeah, Android uses Gentoo as a base, but to do anything useful with it, you need all that Google software. Well, yeah, I mean, Google makes the operating system. You can't fault them for that. It's a proprietary company, all right? All right. Yeah, Harmony OS is supposedly going to be open source. We'll see on that, Vince. I have my doubts on that, but we'll see. Yeah, Gnostic Live is better. You actually have community interaction. That's why I try to do some of these live streams every now and then. You guys know I don't do a lot of live content, but I like to do them, you know. I like to do a live stream at least once every couple of weeks. You know, do 2 or 3 a month at least, live streams. Because, yeah, the community interaction, I mean, that's the point of the live stream. The live stream does save me a little time. Obviously, I don't have to. I mentioned this would typically take me about 4 hours, you know, the whole process of editing and everything. I don't have to do any of that for a live stream. Google's just going to process this thing. It's going to be live on YouTube. Now, if I really wanted to, I could take the recording of this and edit it and actually put a more professional looking video out myself, but I'm not going to do that. We're just going to go with how it went live. All right, guys. Well, I'm probably going to kill the stream here in a couple of more minutes. So if anybody's got anything they want to share, now's the time to get it in. See. Yeah, nothing's really going on in the DistroTube IRC channel. You guys, if you're not, you want to follow DistroTube over on IRC, check out DistroTube on the Freenode network. We have a pretty good crowd that hangs out there most days. Pretty good crowd. It's a friendly crowd too. They'll help you with your Linuxy questions. Of course, they'll talk about off-topic stuff, life in general, the meaning of the universe. They're basically just a bunch of nerds, and they're there 24/7. So anytime you want to talk about Linux, you know, it doesn't end when this stream ends. Big Pod's probably going to be over there. And I put Big Pod on the spot, but I had to after he made that Android comment. Android is Linux, come on. Yeah, Kuberjan, I want Linux BSD crossover. I don't fool with BSD much these days. My little excursions into BSD have not gone well, so. Yeah, DT, I don't think it's being lazy. I think it's making better use of your time. That's part of what it is, actually, Steve, is do I actually want to put the content out there, or do I want to put out a lot less content and spend a bunch of time editing it? And does anybody really care? I doubt you guys would care as far as me spending a ton of time editing audio and video and everything. You guys just want the content, right? Yeah, Kuberjan, it's 4 a.m. I'm going to sleep. Bye. Bye. DT, install Nodo emoji so you can see our smiles. Nodo emoji, yeah. That's a good idea. That way I get the emojis in the chat. Yeah, DT, I'm probably not. I'm going to, after I'm done with this deb file for Dupliseek. Okay. So Big Pod is working on a project. He won't be in the IRC chat. But there'll be other folks over there. I might hang out over there too a little bit after the stream. Yeah, the meaning of the universe, of course. I should have known it was coming. Peter says 42. DT, what do you think of a Linux BSD system? I don't think anything of it. I'm not the BSD guy. Don't fool with BSD. And I'm sure it's a great server operating system. BSD on the desktop? No. By the way, it wasn't part of the news stories we covered on this edition of Taking Into Account, but did you guys read about Canonical, Ubuntu, 1910? ZFS is going to be available. Kind of a big deal. I'm kind of interested in playing with ZFS once Ubuntu 19.10 comes out. That is the Eoan Ermine. For those of you that forgot what that code name is going to be, EE. Well, that's a horrible name. Yeah, BSD as desktop equals nightmare. Absolutely. A horror movie. Yeah, Chris Titus, ZFS is awesome. Yeah. I'll definitely be playing with it. All right, so about to call it an evening. I haven't looked at all your vids, but do you have any on how to use and set up Docker? I haven't done anything with Docker. And I should. Yeah. You raise a good question there. Why isn't there any Docker content? I typically don't do much with Docker. Probably why I don't have any content on it. But I think Docker is interesting technology, and it deserves some coverage on this channel. Right. Yeah, ZFS does have some awesome features, yeah. Of course, the big feature is to be able to roll back. So BigPod, he's working on DupliSeq, which is a Python app that he's helping develop. I'm glad to see you are programming in Python now, BigPod. There for a while, all you used was C#, and I was getting worried. You were drinking the Microsoft Kool-Aid a little bit too much. Of course, if I know BigPod, he's probably going to do a port of this in C#. Yeah, Mitchell says bye-bye, Mitchell. Appreciate you hanging out. Thanks, DT. Yeah, ZFS is the 3-barrel shotgun of file systems. Yeah, but do we really need it? ButterFS. Well, let me just stop there. ButterFS. We've been waiting a decade for ButterFS to become more mature. Of course, part of that is ZFS has been around forever. ZFS predates ButterFS by many years, so that's probably why ZFS is where it's at. But it's strange that ButterFS was always going to be the next big file system on Linux, and it never really caught on. Yeah, ButterFS ain't got nothing on ZFS. ButterFS definitely hasn't got stability. I wouldn't trust ButterFS with like critical data for sure. That's why so many Linux distros still ship Extend 4 as the default file system. Yes, silly boy. I had high hopes for Riser FS 10 years ago. Yeah, Riser FS was really good. Unfortunately, Riser FS, nobody uses it now. Mainly because the creator of Riser FS, Mr. Riser, murdered his wife and went to prison. It's a shame, though, because Riser FS really had some killer features. Is it too soon for that? All right. I should probably get out of here before I get demonetized. All right, guys. I want to thank all of you guys still hanging out in the chat. Thanks, Chris and Big Pod, Telsaurus and Silly Boy. Thank you, Peter and Climby. And quite a bit of you still hanging out. Of course, before I go, this episode of Taking Into Account was made possible by Ansem, Chris, the other Chris, Dylan, George, Mitchell, Natek, Philip, Rob, Robert, Sam, Willie, the producers of the show, my highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. Without these guys, Taking Into Account episode 48 would not have been possible. The show was also brought to you by all those fine ladies and gentlemen, all my supporters over on Patreon. You guys see those names on the screen. Without each and every one of those folks, again, this show would not be possible. If you'd like to support the channel, please do so. You'll find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. All right, guys. Peace.